Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to tonight's presentation all about Red S, which, if for those of you who are new to it, is relative energy deficiency in sport. I am joined by my dear friend Alexandra Coates. She is an exercise physiology PhD candidate, a former pro triathlete, and current triathlon coach. Her main background in academia is in overtraining, but in recent years, she's actually gotten a lot more interested in Red S. And what I love about talking to her is she's not only, studying and researching this stuff, she actually sees it through the lens of an elite athlete. So I think she has so much really great information to share with us tonight. So first of all, when we talk about Red S, you might have heard of the female athlete triad. That's kind of this term that was popularized back in the 80s, 90s. And that's this idea of, when women in sport would lose their period, develop an eating disorder, and have bone density issues that would lead to stress fractures. And for a really long time, people sort of assumed that you had to have those three things. You had to be super skinny, and that's when you had problems. But Red S is sort of this idea that's come about in the last few years that sort of speaks to the fact that, not everyone who's dealing with a problem with energy in sport is going to necessarily be severely underweight. Not every woman is going to, menstruate normally because they're on hormonal birth control, or they're going through menopause, or they don't have their period yet, so we don't really have a way of gauging this. So Red S was sort of designed to kind of bring all of those things together. And it's interesting, and we'll get into this more later. Red S doesn't necessarily mean that you're under eating. It does mean that you're in an energy deficit, but it means that you're in an energy deficit where it really matters, or when it really matters, which is around our training. So with that in mind, who is at risk? This is the interesting thing. Again, it's not just, skinny, elite, young female athletes. This is everyone. Men are at a risk for Red S. Women of all ages, of all shapes, of all sizes, of all levels of ability are all at risk for developing Red S. Now, obviously, the ones we see in the media and the ones that we hear about the most are, of course, the ones who are in that sort of, super skinny elite category. But, these symptoms can actually really affect those of us who are, more recreational, and it can really inhibit us from having fun on the bike. So I'm going to get Alex to explain some of these symptoms and warning signs of Red S. And it starts, fairly casually, fairly slowly, and then it steadily ramps up. So, our goal here is to kind of be paying attention for these early warning signs, be willing to get our help, to be willing to, just really pay attention to how we're feeling and how we're performing if we're going to make sure that we can avoid getting into Red S. So here's Alex explaining some of the signs and symptoms.
And then once, let's say you've been in this energy deficit for a while, your weight will probably have stabilized. But then you might start even seeing some weight gain. What you probably will see is water retention. So I notice, and I think a lot of coaches and other athletes will notice this kind of swelling in the face. I don't know if, I'll look at the chat here, but I don't know if people have noticed that in athletes who have reds, but they get kind of poofy looking. And it's weird because it's not really a weight gain. It's like a swelling or an inflammation. And we don't really know what's driving that, but I've definitely seen it a lot. And then you're going to start seeing some of those bone issues. So stress reactions, maybe stress fractures. And then at this point in time too, you'll be able to go to the doctor and get a blood test, and there'll be a lot of blood markers that will be bad. So you'll have decreased sex hormones. Sex hormones are almost not the easiest ones to measure because, especially in women, they're cycling, they cycle anyway. So it's hard to really be like pinpoint when you're clinically low. But you'll have low leptin, you'll have low IGF-1, which is an anabolic hormone that will help you recover from exercise. So that one will be low, and that's an early warning sign. You probably will start having low iron or low ferritin. You'll have low fasted blood glucose and insulin and high cholesterol. So your blood lipids and blood glucose is going to look off. And this should be clinically low. So the doctor, often doctors aren't going to flag low blood glucose because they might just think, oh, you're an athlete, like it's meant to be low kind of thing, you're healthy. But if it's clinically low, that's actually like a very good warning sign of reds. And then usually by this point in time, you're not feeling that good in training, you're, plateau, or you just like kind of start feeling like you've lost a lot of that top end. So you can't sprint, you can't go really fast, you can't dig really deep. And then kind of that late stage is going to be you're completely plateaued or having these decreases in performance, going to start having bone injuries. So this is when you're getting into the kind of osteoporosis type phase. You'll see this is the athletes that have stress fractures in their spine, stress fractures in their femur, stress fractures in their pelvis, and like every year they have a new one. And then just kind of loss of metabolic control. So can't lose weight if you want to.
Mm-hmm. And for cyclists in particular, because, we're not doing a lot of high impact stuff, we are at like a much higher risk of low bone density just by the nature of our sport. So we're like already kind of set up for this, which is where, strength training and stuff are pluses in addition to avoiding getting down this road for sure.
And it might almost be like kind of almost a negative in the same sense as like the periods was, in that because you aren't doing like that, you're not running, like let's say you're a pure cyclist and you don't run, you're not going to get those stress fractures even if your bone mineral density is really low. So you might kind of miss that early stress reaction or whatever that a runner might have, which is almost too bad. Because you don't want to get
in a very weird way.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get to the point where your bones are so fragile that just like falling is going to break a bone.
Well, and you see this with a lot of mountain bikers who, have a very mild crash and their collarbone just like snaps because of it, or fractures like instantly, or, they put a hand down and like, break something in there very easily. And actually, so I was wondering, as far as like getting all of these tests done, when you're going to a doctor, what do you say to, like, any advice on like what to say to a doctor when you're like, I want these things checked out?
I don't think I'm the right one to ask, because I have such a bad personal history with doctors, and for this very reason, because I am coming at it from, coaching or athlete perspective, where I'm like, we just need to test these athletes. We'll know whether or not they have reds. Like I give them the markers. And then of course, doctors are trained to only deal with kind of like really intense situations or the flip side, which is obesity and diabetes and everything. And so they're not going to see like a healthy athlete of any age and be like, oh, this person has an issue. You can say like, I've been feeling really bad in training. I think my iron's low. I think a lot of doctors know anemia or whatever. Be like, I have a history of anemia. And then you could be like, and also like, maybe I'm having some of these symptoms of reds, and show them something. Try and be like, really like, can we just test a couple of things in my blood, and then that might help. And then of course, if you have a supportive sports type doctor, that is great. But no, I have had my fair share of like really frustrating encounters, and so
Yeah. And I will say, like, I've had the same exact kind of situation, and I've also then gone to a naturopath, and it's not the cheapest option by far, but they're also much more willing to be like, okay, sure, we'll write you the requisition for it. So it's not going to be super cheap, but it's actually less expensive than you would think. And I mean, if you can head off a lot of like major problems, that's totally worth it. And there are a lot more companies now. It's like, again, not sponsored, not an ad, but there are more companies like Inside Tracker who are coming to Canada and actually like can do the blood work and like send you a panel back. So, that's not.
I thought there was a cool one, but I think it's just very much based out of the States, and they'll do all this athlete testing, and I don't know if you can send for it to Canada, but it'd be good.
It's getting better. I can say that much from having gone between the US and Canada a bunch. And then as far as symptoms and warning signs go, this lovely little graphic I have here, it's partially because I wanted to talk about like the more mental side of things too, because I think like the emotional roller coaster that is like signs and symptoms of red S. I mean, the fatigue is like a big one, but definitely like irritability and just like spontaneous bursts of emotion. Like when you've normally been a very even keel person and suddenly just like everything is irritating you.
Yeah, that'll come with reds. It'll also come with overtraining. So it's kind of sometimes hard to distinguish between the two. That said, like it's all recovery based, right? So like with reds, you're not taking enough fuel to recover. With overtraining, you're not maybe like getting enough time in between sessions or whatever to recover properly. And so in both cases, you're going to have, one of the earliest warning signs is mood shifts. And I think, irritability just seems to be one of the best ones, because it's almost one of the ones that you can notice in yourself the easiest. Like, you're like, wow, I'm not responding to anybody well. Like, everything's making me mad. Everything's pissing me off. Like, or I feel like emotionally unstable. Those ones are really big warning signs for me. With reds or overtraining. So you can kind of then take a step back and be like, okay, have I been doing a good job with my nutrition? Have I been doing a good job with my sleep? Am I, going really hard all the time in my training, and like try to dial that in a bit.
Yeah, I like the idea of just playing detective a little bit, right? Like, and I mean, the more kind of that information you can have sort of on hand, the easier it is to get a doctor to actually test you. The easier it is to talk to a dietitian and actually like go in like armed with questions and like, this is what I've been eating. Like, is this enough? The easier it is to like look at a training plan and talk to a coach. So I'm a big fan of like, anytime we can kind of keep notes on all of this stuff, the better. We used to, when we coached camps where we were, riding a lot of hours every day and we're coaching junior cyclists, we had everyone fill out the Huber-McKinnon scale every day, which is just like, I think it's like 4 or 5 questions where it rates, it's like irritability, fatigue, and a few other things like that.
I think.
On like a scale of 1 to 7. And you could sort of see like the athletes start like gradually getting that irritability, like number was going up and up and up. And when it got, high enough, we're like, okay, time for a couple days off.
And I also noticed in training too, like I talk about this with my boyfriend because he wasn't an endurance athlete. And so just like how many little fights you'll get in with your teammates, like things that you would never do in normal life. But like, in a pool, like as a triathlete in a pool, we'd have so many fights, like, just blow ups. And then it's just like, that's so training based, right? The intensity is high, your emotions are high, but then also you're overtired and you're probably not fueling properly. And it's just so easy to, have these little blow ups.
Totally.
After that, like, oh, it wasn't good.
Keep an eye out for those. Yeah. So on that note, actually, monitoring tools, and we got asked a couple questions about this. You mentioned this. So yeah, how would you go about keeping an eye out on all of this stuff?
So with like, with overtraining, there's kind of more actual tools you can use. For reds, it's almost like, I would say, kind of like journaling, like you said, or if you have good like training peaks kind of habits, I think that's going to be your best bet. So it's like knowing where you're at in terms of your mood in general. And then, so like, even if you do like a little kind of your own made up like mood scale every day when you're training hard, and get a sense of where you're at for that. And if you start trending down, that either you need to back off on the training or maybe just really focus in on the recovery and eat a lot more. You can definitely do weight, knowing that people fluctuate on a day-to-day basis. So like you can go up and down by 2 kilograms a day easy, and that's not like fat mass, it's just food and water and whatever. And so I think I think the scale can be quite triggering for some people, but sometimes it can actually be really helpful because you get the sense for your weight fluctuations. You realize that like 2 kgs, which could be like 5 pounds, isn't actually that big of a deal because it'll go away by the next morning kind of thing. And then, but then you do get a sense of, okay, if I'm trending down, the only way you can trend down is if you're not taking in enough calories. And maybe you're trying to lose a bit of weight, but then you need to realize, okay, with that weight loss, I'm going to start bringing on some of these symptoms. And so you have to be really careful about it. And like, it's got to be a slow, long process for losing weight.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. So maybe let's kind of segue into that really quickly. Is the weight loss question, because I mean, it is still a fact of life that, I mean, people are going to want to lose weight. And in some cases, as far as talking about red S, like we're not talking about just the lowest body mass index of everyone. Like we're talking about people who maybe like could actually lose weight totally safely. So how do they do that without veering into problem territory where now everything's affected?
So I think one thing to remember too is RED is very like specific to while you're also training. So I think like it's one thing if you're just eating less, a bit less, like let's say 400 calories a day to try and lose weight, but you're not also
400 to 300 calories less per day, not total per day.
Yeah, but a very good distinction. Like, so yeah, usually if you're thinking, okay, you know, I need to take in, let's say 2,500 calories in a day to meet my daily demands, but then also, you know, exercise a bit, and then also you should always have a little bit extra to go towards recovery and stuff. But let's say I normally take in about 2,500 calories, I'm healthy, I'm good. Now if I take in about 22 to 2,300 and you do that for a period of time, that's kind of like your safest bet for losing weight and avoiding REDs. Now the issue comes when you're trying to do it while training. If I have like a very high performance athlete, I don't believe that you should almost ever be purposefully trying to lose weight, because I think you'll get there almost by accident, especially like when the training gets really intense before race season, and then when you start racing, I find the weight just goes away. If your metabolism is flexible and like healthy, you'll get down to your race weight throughout the race season, I find. If you're healthy. Now, let's say you're not training that hard and you're like, you know, you're maybe racing a little bit, maybe training, but you're not like professional athlete kind of, and you do really want to like focus on the nutrition to lose a little bit of weight. I would say pick your times when you're going to do it. So if you're trying to train really hard, then the only way you get the benefits of the training are if you can recover from that training. And so you need to be able to fuel properly. So I wouldn't try to lose weight and train really hard. I would try to like lose weight, you know, in some periods of time when I'm training a bit easier or when it's less focused training. You definitely can like take in a bit less calories on your easy days and then just eat as much as you can to support the training on the hard days. It's all about like kind of balancing the stressors, I think. And then once again, it's like, it's not much. You don't want to go below 500 calorie deficit a day. That's going to really drive the RED symptoms.
Yeah. And a couple of people are talking about this in the chat. Like, definitely consulting with a dietitian is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself, whether you're trying to lose weight or not. Just kind of like make sure that what you are eating is supporting the work that you're trying to do. Because we don't really want to be like shooting ourselves in the foot just over and over again by doing this diet that is not working for us.
Yeah. And I think one thing too to note, so I mean, this is like a bit of a complicated number, but we basically know that if you're taking in so if you have less than 30 to 35 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day, and that should be above what you burn. If you don't have that extra cushion, which is like, if you're under that extra cushion of 30 to 35 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day, which I can kind of walk you through in a sec if you want, then that's when you're going to start seeing these symptoms of REDs, because you're not able to recover from the training. You don't have enough reserves. So the big separation between that fancy number that I just said and just kind of your normal calories in, calories out is calories in, calories out doesn't have a buffer. It's not like, even if you're taking into account your resting metabolic rate and what you burned in exercise, there's no buffer there. And so what happens is people are still not taking in enough to recover from the exercise. And so you do need like, it's about 40 to 45 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day above your resting metabolic rate in what you burn in training in order to not be in REDs. So what that works out to, yeah. So like, let's say I kind of have an example. So like, if you're 60 kgs, like let's say I weigh 60 kilograms and I'm about 20% body fat, that puts me at like 48 or something kilograms of fat-free mass. That's my body weight minus my fat mass, okay? And so you can kind of estimate what your percent body fat is. Usually it's higher than you think it is. So like,
especially for women, yeah,
even elite athlete women are often more closer to 20% than not. And that's because we don't estimate it properly. So with a DEXA scan, where it really gets at the fat within your body, like elite athletes will be 20% and they look like they're sticks. So
And I will say pretty much anytime you see an elite athlete list their body fat or their weight in an article,
Yeah,
they're lying.
wrong.
They have
It's wrong.
subtracted like 5 to 10 pounds
Yep.
and like 3 to 5%.
Yep, exactly. No, and the percent is always wrong. So and then it's funny because then when someone does go for a DEXA, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm obese," and it's just because we have these norms that are completely skewed, because we're either like basing our percent body fat off of skin folds, which is not really getting at the internal fat. There's not a good the calculation I think is not good enough, and then yeah, I don't know. We just underreport, and so this idea that elite women are like 15% body fat is not true. They're 18 to 20, and they look very, very skinny. And so what I'm saying is if you're kind of a more normal person, you can estimate 25 to 30% body fat, and that's fine. So you can kind of like look online if you want and try and figure out around what you think your percent body fat is. It's not a huge, like none of these numbers, you're never going to get the numbers perfect. So it's just estimates, right? It's just like kind of playing with this idea of how many calories you need in a day. So, okay, if I'm like 48 kilograms of fat-free mass and I burn about, let's say my resting metabolic rate is like 1,500 calories a day, which means I'm like pretty active, but like that's a pretty high resting metabolic rate, but it's possible. So I'm healthy and active, burn about 1,500 calories a day. And then, so then what I need, but let's say I do no exercise in that day, that means just by resting, I'm burning 1,500 calories. And then I need at least 40 extra calories per kilogram of my fat-free weight. So multiply that by the 48 per day, which will put me close to 2,000 calories, just to not exercise. So that's like 2,000 calories. Like a lot of people think that's high because that's like the standard for a man, right? But that's actually like for an active female with an active resting metabolic rate, and to have that cushion, I'm about 2,000 calories a day. Then if I burn 1,000 calories in training, now I'm 3,000 calories a day, and that's just to not get reds.
Mm.
So it's just basically knowing that it's more calories than you think. You're not going to get fat. Your body literally needs it to work. It's always more than you think.
Yeah. And this is something you can, totally experiment with and play around with. And, you'll see that, like Alex was saying, like the trend on the scale, like if it does start to kind of like clearly go up and like stay up, like, okay, then, that might mean you're eating a little too much for what you need and you can dial it back. But a lot of the time I find like it's comical how much you can eat if you're training, like before you start dealing with any weight gain.
Yeah, because your body's very good at using it. I mean, that's the thing. It's like your resting metabolic rate is going to shoot up when you're healthy and recovering properly, so you're not in reds. And then it's just going to go towards repairing those tissues, and just, you're going to be burning more oxygen after sometimes up to 24 hours following like a very, very long session. You're burning more oxygen. It's going to go towards, all of your physiological processes, building bone, building muscle, everything like that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of our kind of thoughts are around this very like sedentary person who just doesn't do much, but like we do stuff. And if you're doing stuff, and you're healthy and your metabolism is like active, then yeah, you can eat a lot and you're not gonna gain weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and Alex, what do you think about like HRV monitoring? Because I think that's a pretty easy one that people can start doing for like with their phones, no cost, like super simple.
I find it's pretty good at like it's gonna tell you primarily when you have a reduction in parasympathetic activity. So that's kind of like your rest, digest stuff stage, right? Whereas the sympathetic is the fight or flight. And heart rate variability is primarily measuring that parasympathetic side. So it's going to tell you when that is being suppressed. Now, that shows up more with overreaching than it probably will with reds. So it kind of depends on like where you're at with reds. I feel like in the acute phase, you might start seeing some differences in heart rate variability. And then maybe also in the really prolonged phase when you've just been like in this state for a very long time, you'll see it. But when you're in the middle and your body's almost just adapted to this low energy phase, which is just, it's going to suppress all your, unnecessary physiological processes such as reproduction, like everything is suppressed, I don't think you're going to see it show up very obviously in heart rate variability. It probably would if you had like a more direct measure of sympathetic activity, which we do in our lab with a needle, and you get right in the sympathetic nerve, then you would see that. But the thing with heart rate variability is it's very vagal based or parasympathetic based. And so it almost like requires really big hits before it's going to show up. But it's fun to monitor, and it's fun to get your own baselines and see like what's altering it.
Yeah, for sure. I use an app for it, HRV for training, that actually has like a bunch of subjective stuff that you get to put in every morning. So it's basically like doing the Hooper McKinnon on your phone. So that's always kind of a nice, like, am I irritated? Yes. And it actually like lets you track your cycle too. Like you can say, do you have your period, which is sweet. So yeah, just kind of my aside on that. Even if HRV itself isn't really that helpful, just any kind of like thing that takes a minute to think about how you're feeling during the day is great for those of us who are training like fairly hard here. And actually, on the note of training, we touched on this a bit here, but overtraining versus red S. So from what you kind of said, overtraining is when you're not taking enough time to recover. Red S is when you are not eating enough food in order to properly recover. But usually, I'm going to guess most of the time, if someone has one, they probably have the other.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the time, but I don't think it's exclusive because so yeah, often you're going to have both because you increase your training load, which is overtraining essentially, right? You're increasing your training load, and then because you did that, a lot of the time your appetite's actually kind of suppressed, and this can be from just really high intensity training. It kind of suppresses your appetite, so you might be eating to hunger, but it's just not quite enough calories, or you might kind of have forgotten to increase your calories to meet the extra training that you're doing. And so, you just get used to eating the same things every day and doing the same things. And so then you kind of fall into reds. And so that's where you have the reds and overtraining together. But you can have, I'm pretty certain, and this is kind of one of the research papers that we're writing right now, and the evidence does support this idea that you can have overtraining without an energy deficiency. And so that would be primarily driven by the autonomic nervous system. And so it often comes from doing a lot of high intensity training, and just not being able to recover properly from those sessions before going into the next sessions. And it basically is going to cause kind of this host of symptoms that usually pretty much show up in exercise. And so kind of like the biggest one is that you see this suppression in heart rate at any given stage of exercise. And so then you also can't get to your heart rate max. So what that means is you just can't, it feels like you can't push. And sometimes it feels like you're not trying, because it's like you don't have the same amount of lactate accumulation, and so hydrogen ions, which cause the kind of like burning sensation, pain feeling, and so you can't get there. And then because you can't get there, you're like, I'm not trying hard enough, and you try harder, but then you just kind of can't. And then basically, you just cannot push. They'll even find that people can't hit 90% of their heart rate max. So like there's these big downward suppression of your heart rate, and then therefore your ability to perform. With reds though, you don't necessarily see that heart rate shift. And so that's why often athletes can perform in reds, at least at the start, because they're not having kind of this same like central cardiovascular suppression. And so they can maybe perform just as well. It's just that they're going to start seeing those symptoms of stress fractures and like all these other hormonal problems. Whereas overtraining, it shows up quite a lot earlier, and it's basically just like, you're going to do bad. Your performance is screwed. So
yeah, so similar but different. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about are bad ideas. So for women, I mean, we get hit with a lot of, fad diet ideas that come, pretty fast and furious. And before you know it, you're suddenly like intermittent fasting on a vegan, keto, paleo cleanse of some type, raw cleanse. I don't know. So yeah, as far as bad ideas for those of us who are, training pretty seriously here,
I
what's
think,
what's
sorry.
trending?
Yeah. So the way I see it is diets are meant for non-athletes. They're meant because a lot of the time what they're trying to do almost is mimic exercise. Create a caloric deficit or like create a bit of a stimulus, a stress stimulus essentially to drive some of these adaptations, which can sometimes be quite good for you. Like with intermittent fasting, I feel like is not as good for females as it is for males. That's kind of what the research is saying. But either way, a lot of the kind of adaptations you get from it are similar to what you get from exercise. But the issue now is when you combine it. So you combine training stress with diet stress. And you just can't get best of both worlds there. That's like recipe for disaster because
it's like pouring way too much into one cup.
Yeah, because the whole point of training is it's hard and it does stress your body. And it's not necessarily like good for you. It's the adaptation that's what's good for you, right? It's the building back up is what creates all of these helpful, beneficial adaptations. That's why athletes live the longest. It's not because they spend 24 hours a day on their bike. It's because they recover from that and adapt to it and become stronger and healthier because of it.
Yeah. And we should say, if you are riding regularly, like if you are training regularly, like you are in this category of being an athlete. I think a lot of us hear like athlete and we're like, oh, that's not me. Like, I'm not nearly, but like, if you're working hard, if it feels like you're working hard, you are working just as hard as the dude who's at the front of the Tour de France. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like hard work is hard work. It does not matter what your watts are. So just wanted to throw that out there to anyone that's listening to this and is like, but I'm not an athlete.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Exactly. It's the stress on your system, right? So let's say you're just starting out and you're only riding 2-3 times a week. That stress on your system is the same like amount of work as somebody who's used to biking 10 times a week, right? And like that's what their body's used to. So for them, like that stress is the same as your stress when you're just starting out. And so you almost want to think about it like load on your body, not external metrics, right?
Yes.
So then, in terms of like these diets and everything, especially if you're actually like trying to train seriously, you need to be getting in all 3 macronutrients. So your fat, your protein, and your carbs, for sure. You can't be cutting out any of them because they're all essential for your adaptation to training. And then if you're going into there was some, a big push for doing this fasted training, a couple of years ago. And the research now is basically saying like, sure, that can drive some adaptations early and quickly in people who aren't really used to training. But then in people who have been training for a while, you're just accelerating this REDS process. You're basically driving, it's too much stress. And it's the same with, it's just, if you think about it, like, once again, the whole point of training is to break you down so that you can then build up. If you're breaking yourself down too much so you can't recover from it, then you're not benefiting yourself. And that's what pretty much any diet, any special diet's going to do for you. It's going to drive this stress response that, coupled with regular training, is going to be too much to have the beneficial effects. And the easiest one to think about is like, okay, when my body's very stressed out, it's going to downregulate all my essential systems. And one of the first ones that's going to be downregulated is my resting metabolic rate. So if I'm dieting or I'm taking in like no carbs and my resting metabolic rate gets downregulated through the sympathetic nervous system, so it's just pure stress, then I'm not losing weight. You stop being able to lose weight completely, even though you're dieting and training. So then it's like, that's the point.
Yeah. And I mean, like, let's be real here. We all have enough stress on us right now as it is existing in this year. So we don't really need to add a whole lot of extra stress to it for sure. So that kind of leads to this idea of, well, rethinking nutrition, but also like not rethinking nutrition, like kind of going back to the very basic stuff. So I very quickly just threw my like my usual stuff that I always talked about when I was writing Fuel Your Ride, which came out a couple of years ago, and it's my nutrition book.
Cool.
Where it's basically like, hey, we need all three of these macronutrients. So just what you said. So, you know, we need our protein, it's recovery, it's how our muscles grow, it's how we adapt. The big problem that most Canadians and Americans have is we tend to eat protein as like our one big whack at dinner every night. So we have like our giant steak on the grill or whatever, but we're much better off getting it in small amounts throughout the day. Our protein, our fats, they're not bad. When we say like, we're not really fans of the keto diet, we're still fans of fat. Fat's great. Big, healthy fats. We want to maybe skip the trans fats, but otherwise, like,
go for it.
They're essential. Yeah.
And you burn them. You burn them in training. It's an essential like fuel, carbs. So
exactly. Carbs also not bad. Cyclists need them. No diet should be carb free. You know, we do want, you know, a lot of our carbs to come from those whole food sources, whether it's fruits and vegetables and, you know, whole grains and stuff like that. But you know what, when we're burning on the bike, like we need those quick refined carbs to get going fast. Actually, we just got asked this question of go-to snacks to pack for long rides. Ooh, good question.
I always did. I haven't done a lot of long rides in a while, but when I was training hard, I always used to bring a banana, and then I really like just like Cliff bars, like heavy duty kind of bars that'll actually work. I do not use gels unless I'm racing, which I know you're not supposed to just try new things for racing, but I was very good at using them in races, but I will not touch them. Cause I don't know. I feel like especially for long rides, it's just like, you can eat real food. Like you can stop at a coffee shop and get a donut, and you'll be probably fine. So yeah, that's mine. What about yours, Molly?
Yeah, for long rides, I'm all about the coffee shop stop. And this is like what all the pros do too. This is not just like a casual rider. This is what like everyone is doing in Europe. They're like riding to the top of mountains and stopping at cafes up there.
Like treat, yeah,
like baguette in their back pocket. So that's my model, the baguette in the back pocket style. Usually more on like the donut side of things, but yeah, that's how I roll as well. Someone also was asking, hang on, I've lost it in the chat. Oh, geez. So they're asking, it says, it sounds like red S happens with consistent deficiency in the diet. What about changes to diet such as intermittent fasting that have a cheat day mixed into a regular eating schedule? Can that prevent red S from happening? So I think, well, maybe I'll let you speak to that first.
So, okay, there's two important studies that I should talk about here. So the first one is that they found that with women, so they had two groups of women. They had normal, healthy, menstruating women, and then they had women who were seeing this menstrual disturbances that are associated with REDS, right? And they tracked their nutrition, and they found that both groups were eating enough calories. But the group that was having the menstrual disturbances, they were not taking in as many calories throughout the day. So they kind of like back-ended it and had all their calories at the end of the day. And so what this says is that there was longer periods of time in an energy deficiency throughout the day. And that drove these symptoms of RED. So they found that it wasn't just the period, but they had increased cortisol, and they had decreased sex hormones, and they had decreased resting metabolic rate. So even though they were taking in enough calories by the end of the day, they still were getting REDs. So that's one thing to consider. And then another important study to consider is really this importance of carbs. So it was this really kind of neat study. They were looking at a lot of bone markers, and they did double sessions of high intensity cycling in a day, and they fed the groups different things. And what they found was that essentially, if you were eating enough calories, but you didn't have enough carbs, so it was a low carb group, but high fat group, they had all these markers of bone mineral loss, even though they had enough calories. Whereas the low calorie groups, they had less calories, but they had enough carbs to refill their glycogen stores. They didn't have that bone loss. So the carbs were protective for bone, not necessarily the calories. Now, over time, you're going to have probably calorie driven problems too, but just in this acute setting, carbs are very protective for bones. So I guess what I'm getting at here is training, once again, training and diets is just not a great mix, kind of depending on, it doesn't really matter what your diet is, it's going to probably not work out. But
I would say, like, if you are like stuck on the idea of doing that, if that's like the thing that you want to do and you've found it works, I would try to at least time your long ride with that cheat day. So at least that way you are fueling that ride with all of those bonus glycogen stores. Because I think like the one thing, and this is what I was going to talk about next, is just sort of like the actual like a lot of the red S stuff can be largely solved by timing our nutrition smarter around our training, instead of just thinking like, it's very important to think about our nutrition like as a whole, but it's also for red S really important to think about how we're eating before, during, and after our training. Because you can eat a huge calorie, like you can be eating way more calories than you actually need and still end up in red S if you ride in the morning, don't eat all day, and then just go nuts at night, right? Like that whole, the whole pizza, the gallon of ice cream kind of situation, because you're starving because you didn't eat during the day, but you rode. That's not fueling your actual work. So that's going to kind of come back and bite you. So we want to make sure we're timing our food to fuel our rides. Hence the title of actually I have it right here. Hence Fuel Your Ride. Actual book that exists in the world. So we want to make sure we have a pre-ride meal. So that might be, just like a little snack before we go, because we've already had our like breakfast a couple hours before. It might be just our straight up breakfast. Don't stress too hard on that. Just something in your stomach. In-ride eating and drinking. This is something that I talk about all the time. Like, it's a skill. Like, I don't know how many of you struggle, but like for me, when I'm, especially with like mountain biking, as soon as the terrain gets like windy or something, suddenly I'm like, oh, it's been 45 minutes and I have not taken a sip of water, because I'm like, oh God, I can't reach my bottle, and oh geez, it's gone. So learning how to eat and drink on the bike is actually something that I think all of us could stand to get better at. So that's my first thing. And short rides, 60 minutes. Okay, fine. Like you can get by with just a couple sips of water. It's not going to be a huge deal, but anything over that, you want to be putting something in the tank. Like, I'm not going to give like perfect caloric recommendations or anything, but be getting some water, be getting some food. Like the dry training rides, I feel like, are very common for people who want to lose weight. They're like, oh, I'm just not going to eat while I exercise. It's going to come back and bite you, because you are going to be hungry later, and you are going to have this like metabolic issue of your body just does not know what to do with itself.
And all the weight you lose is just water weight anyway, so whatever.
Exactly. And then, just very quickly, post ride, we want to have some protein. We're not super panicked about like, oh my God, I'm in the house, I need to get in the fridge right now and eat. You've got some time, but like, let's get some protein, let's get some carbs, let's get a meal in, and honestly, it's funny if you are thinking towards weight loss. And I mean, like, I'm saying that because like we are cyclists, like it's a fact of life that some of us care about that. If we actually eat before, during, and after our rides, guess what? We're probably going to eat less later in the evening. I know the times that I've done really poorly at fueling my rides and like haven't eaten enough after, those are the nights where I'm like, let's go to Dairy Queen at like 11 p.m.
Yeah. So true. It's so true. I think too, when you do this structured like eating around training, it takes a lot of the pressure off of focusing on like calories over the whole day. I really, even through all this talk, I don't like counting calories. I don't think you should. I don't think it's really possible to do it properly. Like, I really think that some of those food tracking apps underestimate the calories in the foods, because like overestimate the calories, so then you think that you ate more than you did. Because like sometimes I put in my food, I'm like, man, I should be like 5,000 pounds because of what this is saying I ate, but I don't think that's how many calories I actually ate. Anyway.
And as women, we also totally underestimate the amount of food in a serving a lot of the time, especially with like healthier foods, to be honest. Like I did a food scale thing where I like, put the bowl, I like filled it with a serving of blueberries, I filled it with a serving of Greek yogurt, and I was like, holy crap, that's a lot more than I normally eat.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very easy to just not be at all accurate on what you're eating.
Yeah, we can't know like exactly how many calories we're taking in, and we can't know how many calories we're burning. So then when you're trying to do this like exact math, it's like so hard. And so that's why when I'm saying like this 200, 300 calorie deficit, I know that it's just an estimate. The idea is that you are trying to be like as in tune with your body as possible so that this like fueling around training becomes very intuitive. And I think, yeah, it's nice when you're fueling around your training because it takes the pressure off of worrying about your total calorie count, because as long as you know that you have prepared for the exercise and you ate during the exercise and you recovered after the exercise, then kind of the rest of the day doesn't matter as much. Like that's really the stimulus that'll drive any symptoms of RADs, and it'll drive like your inability to recover if you're not taking in enough around the training. And then but you do that, you hit those points in time really well, and then after that just like it's almost just less important, I think. So
Yeah. And I think the last thing I kind of want to touch on too is what do you do once you're in reds? Because I mean, there's actually been a couple of pretty high performance women and men in the sport in Canada, even in the past like year or two, who have been out for years because like they've been out for 2 or 3 seasons now.
Career ending. It can be, especially for like runners, because they just get stress fractures. So that's career ending because they cannot run anymore because they'll just start running and get a stress fracture. And so they often then switch to biking, which is good but bad because it doesn't heal the osteoporosis, right? Yeah, so big things to do if you're in reds. There's so you definitely want to start, like if you know you're in reds, you're seeing these bone issues, you're seeing these blood markers, you're having fatigue and bad training at this point, like you're full in it. You really need to let's situationally, let's say you're also an elite and you want to keep racing, you want to keep like training and racing. You can try to do that, but you're going to have to up the calories a lot, and you're going to have to really focus those calories in around the training. And then usually what happens is people aren't able to really like see any improvements in their performance or anything until they take some time off and in the off season, and then they're going to have to eat well, and they often find that they gain a lot of weight really fast because they just don't have that metabolic regulation, unfortunately. And it sucks. It's just like this awful situation where you are an elite athlete, you gain a lot of weight, you know that you have to be gaining weight because it's the only way you're going to kind of push through and get that metabolic regulation back. But it's just like such a mental drain, and it's just sad because it's one of those things where like it's going to be a struggle, and you're just going to have to kind of like go along with it and just let your body settle, let the central nervous system settle, let your body get used to a normal amount of calories, and then react to that normal amount of calories for a while. Sometimes this takes like a year or more. Often, honestly, it takes like 2 years. It's really, really hard. But then like you can also do some other things which will help a lot. So like you can try and rebuild your bones through strength training and through eating a lot of protein and calcium and vitamin D, and that'll help rebuild that bone quite a bit. There's only like basically once you've gotten to a point of really low bone mineral density, your body does want to get that better, and so you can rebuild that bone quite a bit. So that's good. What else? Like, it's funny because in the recommendations for athletes, it's like try the nutrition first before you try and back down the training, but you might need to back down the training, and it's just because they're so linked, right?
At least dial down the intensity for a while is probably a good sort of easy.
Yeah, exactly. The intensity for sure. It's so hard. Like I can think of a bunch of athletes that I know who are essentially trying to go to the Olympics, and they're full blown like in reds. One girl I can think of has never had, so she's in mid-20s, has never ever had a natural period. And it's because she started when she was really young, never got a natural period. I'm sure she was put on hormonal birth control at some point to try and drive it, but she's never had a period, and then does have the weight fluctuations and issues, does have stress fracture issues, and is just trying to manage it going into Tokyo and hoping that she can kind of make it through Tokyo. And it's really, really sad because the only way I can see her fully recovering is taking at least a year or two off and like going through this bad weight gain and then kind of getting through it. But you know, she just doesn't have that time right now. So
Yeah.
that's like a not nice story. Sorry.
No, that's our, well, I think that's just kind of like illustrating this point of like the reason we wanted to do this webinar is because we want to, you know, try to make people very aware of like what this can look like and how hard it's going to be to get out of it. So if we can avoid getting into it, that's going to be our optimal strategy here. The best defense is a good offense, or whichever way that
exactly
whichever way that one went. I don't know. I don't play ball sports. And quickly, we had a couple questions. Nancy actually has asked if we're going to be able to watch this afterwards. Yes, it is going to be up on YouTube. Ontario Cycling will post it. So definitely you can refer back to this to catch some of our, you know, faster calculations and whatnot. And April had actually asked if we had any specific advice for teens who need to fuel for training, but also for growth, and are they at greater risk for Red S? I'd say, yeah, like teens are definitely like the group that's at the greatest risk, maybe not the greatest, but like pretty high risk.
There's a lot of combinations of factors with teens that put them at a really high risk. There's like a lack of awareness. There's this awful social media body pressure that teens have right now, which is just so sad. Like, I'm so glad that when I was 14, 15, social media didn't exist, because it's so bad. And then, like, you know, a lack of awareness from coaches and everything. And so yeah, I would say teens are at risk. And then also, yeah, they're gonna go, especially young girls are gonna go through this phase where they gain a lot of weight because of puberty. It's natural, and they're gonna go through that. But then unfortunately, when they're training, we think that guys and girls follow the same trajectory, and they don't. Guys are going to gain muscle and girls are going to gain fat, and guys are going to get faster and girls are going to initially get slower when they're actually going through this, you know, puberty. And so really being supportive around that, and really, I think, helping girls to understand what the natural like progression for a young woman is, and that is that you're going to have a dip in performance for sure at some point, and you kind of want to have that as early as possible. So you want to gain the weight, become a woman, don't train super seriously when you're in your mid-teens, allow your body to kind of become what it's meant to become, and then when you're fully there, then you start really diving into the training. And it sucks that guys are able to just kind of like get stronger and get faster, but it's just like, I think the awareness, like, you know, when I was in sport and training for triathlon, there was none of that awareness. So if we gained weight, it was seen as bad, right? And it's going to happen. Like, every year of my life after the age of 17, I gained a couple pounds, and I always thought that was bad. And then, like, looking back, I was like 115 pounds. Of course I was going to gain weight, but nobody told me that was normal. And so, yeah, I think just really normalizing that and helping girls understand that it's going to happen. So let's let it happen as fast as possible, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, just from like a community perspective, you know, whether it's finding a therapist or finding a dietitian and finding a coach who like understands this stuff and is like, okay, it is not going to like give them crap for gaining weight or any of that, is definitely super helpful. And just finding a community of, I mean, especially in cycling here, like there are so many women in Ontario doing awesome stuff in cycling who will happily talk to like any teen girl about sort of, you know, what it looks like to be in cycling and how important it is to stay healthy versus skinny. So there are definitely resources out there.
I think too, like for those young girls, if they're not getting a period by the age of about 13, 14, it could be because they're training too much and they're not getting quite enough energy in. And that's another one where you really want to just hit it early. You know, when you're 14 and 15, it might feel like sport is super important, but it's really not. It's like, it's not important until you're in your 20s. So like, if that's when you're like going to go to the Olympics or whatever it is, right? So that time, if you're not having a period, that's when you back off, you eat more, you focus on your health. Like, people will say, like my daughter, not my daughter, but you know, people say to me, my daughter wasn't getting a period, and then she finally got it when she took a summer vacation and like gained like 5 pounds. It's like, yeah, it works. It's just that these athletes are never given that opportunity because they're training so hard. They just need a couple months, like maybe 3, maybe 4. For some people, COVID was a blessing because they weren't able to go to the pool. They weren't able to train as hard. And so then they finally got their period. And it's like, yeah, we need to like press that. We need to get these girls healthy early.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll be healthy for the rest of their careers, hopefully.
Exactly. Cool. Jessica actually asked if there are any Ontario women's cycling groups on Facebook. That's actually a fantastic question. I don't have the answer. If there isn't one, I'm feeling suddenly somewhat compelled to maybe start one. So check back in next Thursday. We're actually doing a roundtable with a bunch of women who are like involved in different facets of cycling in Ontario. So maybe we can sort of start planning that then. Yes, Ottawa Women's Cycling Network is awesome. Super cool women in that. All right. Before we wrap up here, Alex, can you tell everyone where they can find you on the interwebs if they want to bug you for more stuff?
Yep. So easiest way is probably my Twitter, which is superalex_c. And then, I mean, you can, I don't know.
You're very easy to Google, I will say.
Very easy, very easy to Google. Yeah, my email will probably, honestly, like my school email can come up. So my school email is acoate01@uofguelph.ca. That one you can look up on the Guelph website, the University of Guelph website, and it'll come up. And then I'm also part of this one athlete thing that we talked about. And so we're trying to develop this monitoring tool for REDs and overreaching for athletes. And it's kind of a slow process, but you can follow us at @1_athlete on Instagram or @1_athlete, or look us up on our website, which is just oneathlete.ca. And we have some like REDs tips and stuff that's coming through right now. So we're just doing more kind of educational posts right now, which might be helpful.
Amazing. Cool. And then I am at Molly J. Hurford, wherever you find, different pockets of the internet, or consummateathlete.com. And of course, everyone should check out ontariocycling.org for tons of info. And on Monday night, we are talking all about nether regions and the bike. So join me back here for another wonderful webinar. It's going to be hilarious. Bring some wine. I'll have some. So that's where we're going to be at. Cool. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. This was awesome. And thank you all of you for being on this panel and hanging out.